"I speak 10 languages," the young woman said, her hands cuffed. The judge burst into laughter. "Sure, and I'm a polyglot," he sneered in front of the entire court. But when she opened her mouth, his laughter froze. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice had never been so full. Every seat occupied, people standing against the walls, journalists with cameras off, waiting for the exact moment to capture the day's news. The collective murmur created a symphony of expectation that made the air conditioning of the old courthouse vibrate. Valérie Dubois walked to the stand, her hands cuffed. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden silence that fell when Constable Richard O'Connell yelled, "All rise! Court is in session." Everyone stood as Justice Harrison Mackenzie entered through the side door, carrying a messy pile of documents. He was a robust man, with perfectly combed back grey hair, and the kind of expression that only years of sentencing others' lives can sculpt onto a face. A mix of boredom, superiority, and occasional disdain. "You may be seated," Mackenzie ordered, dropping the documents onto his desk with a dry thud that startled several people present. Valérie remained standing between two constables, with Eleanor Vance, her public defender, to her left. Eleanor was a middle-aged woman carrying the weight of too many cases and too little budget. She had pronounced dark circles under her eyes, and that barely perceptible tremor in her hands that betrays an excess of caffeine and lack of sleep. "Case number 2-02-4C47B, announced the court clerk. The Crown versus Valérie Dubois. Charges: wire fraud, identity theft, and aggravated scam. The murmur returned to the room like a wave. Valérie felt hundreds of eyes piercing her back, judging her before any evidence was presented. She knew that feeling. She had felt it her whole life. Crown Prosecutor Thomas Sterling rose with theatrical movements, adjusting his tie as if he were an actor at a play's premiere. He was a slender man with sharp features who spoke with that upper-class accent that immediately establishes hierarchies in any room. "Your Honor," Sterling began with a resonant voice, "we have before us a young woman who has perpetrated one of the most elaborate frauds this court has ever seen. For months, Miss Dubois posed as a certified translator, offering services to multinational corporations, educational institutions, and even government agencies." He paused dramatically, walking slowly in front of the jury. She charged thousands of dollars for translations she supposedly performed in 10 different languages. 10, Your Honor. But the reality is that this young woman barely finished high school and has no certification, no degree, no credentials to support her alleged linguistic ability. Sterling turned to Valérie with a smile that aimed to be compassionate, but dripped with condescension. "We understand that economic necessity can lead people to make wrong decisions, but fraud is fraud, regardless of the circumstances." Valérie clenched her fists inside the handcuffs. Every word from the prosecutor was like a hammer blow to her dignity. Not because they were true, but because no one seemed interested in hearing her side. Justice Mackenzie leafed through the documents with a bored expression, as if this were just another case on his endless list of judicial responsibilities. He yawned, without bothering to cover his mouth. "Does the defense have anything to say before we proceed?" he asked in a monotone voice, not even looking up from the papers. Eleanor Vance cleared her throat. Her hands trembled as she held her worn notepad. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. The charges presented are based on misunderstandings and lack of communication with her employers. Miss Dubois is willing to prove that she possesses the abilities she claims to have." "Prove?" Mackenzie finally looked up, his eyebrows arching with mocking interest. "And how exactly do you plan to prove you speak 10 languages? Will you sing us a song in each one?" Some nervous laughter broke out from the public. The judge smiled, pleased with his own humor. "Your Honor, with all due respect." Eleanor tried to continue, but Mackenzie interrupted her with a wave of his hand. "Miss Vance, I have reviewed this case. Your client is 23 years old. She grew up in a low-income neighborhood and, according to records, worked cleaning offices before this alleged translation business." He looked directly at Valérie. "There is no record of higher education, no international certification. Nothing to suggest this young woman could speak even 3 languages, let alone 10. It was then that Valérie raised her head. Her eyes, which had remained fixed on the floor throughout the hearing, met the judge's directly. There was fire in that gaze. There were years of humiliation, of being underestimated, of being invisible. "Permission to speak, Your Honor," she said in a clear, firm voice. Mackenzie looked at her in surprise. Most defendants remained silent during preliminary hearings, letting their lawyers speak for them. But there was something in the way this young woman looked at him that caused a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "Do you have anything relevant to add to the case?" he asked skeptically. I speak 10 languages. Valérie pronounced each word with crystal clarity, without a hint of doubt in her voice. And I can prove it right here, right now, if Your Honor permits me. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights on the ceiling. Everyone present leaned forward, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then Justice Harrison Mackenzie did something no one expected. He threw his head back and let out a laugh. It wasn't polite or contained laughter. It was a thunderous, almost hysterical guffaw that made his portly figure vibrate in the judge's chair. This is incredible, he exclaimed between laughs, wiping tears from his eyes with a handkerchief. The accused wants to prove she speaks 10 languages here in my court. Other laughs joined the judges. Crown Prosecutor Sterling smiled broadly, shaking his head in disbelief. Some members of the public laughed openly. Others whispered mocking comments. Miss Dubois, Mackenzie managed to control his laughter enough to speak, though his voice still trembled with amusement. I appreciate your creativity, but this is a court of law, not a television talent show. We are not going to waste the court's time with circus demonstrations. Does justice seem like a circus to you? Valérie's voice cut through the air like a knife. The judge's laughter instantly froze. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a dangerous silence filled the room. Excuse me? His voice dropped to a menacing tone. Valérie took a step forward, ignoring the warning tug Eleanor Vance gave her arm. With all due respect, Your Honor, you just laughed at me without hearing me. You judged me without allowing me to present my defense. If that's not a circus, I don't know what is. Constable O'Connell stepped forward, ready to intervene if the situation escalated, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. Mackenzie leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You have guts, Miss Dubois, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you from the evidence against you. The evidence lies, Valérie retorted. Or rather, the people who interpreted it lied because they never bothered to verify if I could actually do what I said. And why would we do that? Sterling interjected from his seat. Why should the Crown spend resources verifying the fanciful claims of someone who is clearly trying to avoid the consequences of her actions? Because that is your obligation. Valérie turned to the prosecutor, her voice gaining strength. Your obligation is to seek the truth, not assume guilt based on prejudice. Order! Mackenzie slammed his gavel against the desk. Miss Dubois, you are treading on dangerous ground. I suggest you remain silent before I charge you with contempt. Valérie took a deep breath. She could feel her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. But she wasn't going to back down. Not this time. She had backed down her whole life. Your Honor. Eleanor Vance quickly intervened, her voice trembling but determined. I formally request that my client be allowed to demonstrate her linguistic abilities. If she can prove she speaks the languages she claims, that would fundamentally change the nature of this case. Mackenzie looked at her with a mix of disbelief and annoyance. Miss Vance, are you really suggesting we turn this court into a language exam? I am suggesting we give my client the opportunity to properly defend herself, Eleanor replied, finding a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. Isn't that what justice represents? The judge leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. He looked at Valérie for a long moment, his eyes evaluating her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. There was something about this young woman that unsettled him. It wasn't just her audacity. It was the absolute certainty in her eyes. All right, he finally said, to the surprise of everyone in the room. I will give you your chance to publicly embarrass yourself. But when you fail, and you will fail, I am going to add charges of contempt and obstruction of justice to your already considerable list of legal problems. He turned to his clerk. Contact the language department at the provincial university. I need them to send 10 professors, one specialist in each of the languages Miss Dubois claims to speak. Valérie felt an electrical current run through her body. She would finally have her chance. Finally, someone would listen to her. Miss Dubois, Mackenzie looked at her with that mocking smile he had perfected over decades. I hope you know what you're doing, because when this is over, I'm not only going to find you guilty of fraud, but everyone will know exactly what kind of liar you are. I am not a liar, Valérie responded in a calm but firm voice. And when this is over, you will have to apologize. The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Justice Mackenzie like that. Silence! The gavel slammed again. Mackenzie looked at Valérie with a mixture of fury and something that might have been respect. This hearing is postponed until the evaluators are present. It will be in 3 days. And believe me, Miss Dubois, those 3 days will be the last of freedom you enjoy for a long time. As the constables escorted her out of the room, Valérie couldn't help but wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life, or if she had finally taken the first step towards the vindication she so longed for. What she didn't know was that the coming days would reveal secrets that would change not only her destiny but that of everyone present in that room. The metallic clang of the doors closing echoed like thunder in Valérie's ears. The Maplewood Detention Center was a 3-story building that smelled of industrial disinfectant mixed with human despair. The white walls, chipped at the corners, seemed to absorb all the natural light that tried to enter through the small, barred windows. Valérie walked down the hallway, flanked by 2 officers. Her handcuffs had been removed, but the feeling of oppression remained, invisible now, but heavier than any metal. Other inmates watched her from their cells, some with curiosity, others with that empty gaze that only prolonged confinement can create. Cell 47C, announced Officer Sarah Jenkins, a young woman with a professional but not cruel expression. She opened the metal door with a creak that echoed down the corridor. "You have a cellmate. Hope you get along." Valérie entered, and the door closed behind her with a definitive thud that made her shiver. The cell was small, 2 narrow bunks, a small sink, a toilet with no privacy, and a window so high it only served to remind them that the outside world existed but was out of reach. On the lower bunk, a middle-aged woman looked up from a worn book. Isabelle Moreau's face was marked with lines that told stories she would probably never share. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her eyes, though tired, still retained a spark of intelligence. "So, you're the famous polyglot," Isabelle said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The whole center is talking about you. The girl who defied Justice Mackenzie and lived to tell the tale." Valérie sat on the upper bunk, feeling the thin, hard mattress under her body. She didn't respond immediately. She was exhausted, not only physically but emotionally. The adrenaline from the hearing had evaporated, leaving only a heavy emptiness in her chest. "I'm not famous," she finally said. "I'm just someone who got tired of being underestimated." Isabelle let out a dry laugh. "In here, we're all tired of something. The difference is most people have already given up. You still have fire. That's dangerous in a place like this." "Dangerous? Why?" "Because hope hurts more than resignation." Isabelle closed her book. "Do you really speak 10 languages?" Valérie nodded, looking at the stained cell ceiling. 11, actually. But no one asked. 11? Isabelle sat up, genuinely interested. How is it possible that a girl your age speaks 11 languages? For the first time in days, Valérie felt like talking. Perhaps because Isabelle wasn't looking at her with mockery or disdain. Perhaps because in that small, claustrophobic space, they were both just 2 human beings trying to survive. "My grandmother," Valérie began, her voice softening with the memory. "Grandma Lucie. She worked her whole life as a domestic worker for diplomatic families. Every time one family left, another arrived. Germans, French, Chinese, Russians, Arabs. She learned bits and pieces of all those languages to communicate, to be indispensable." Isabelle listened in silence, and Valérie continued. "When my parents died in a bus accident, I was 5 years old. My grandmother took me in and brought me with her to all those houses. While she cleaned, cooked, and ironed, I sat with the children of those families. I played with them, ate with them, learned with them." Her voice cracked slightly as she remembered. "The diplomats changed every 2 or 3 years. Every time I made a friend, they left. Every time I learned to communicate perfectly in one language, a new family arrived with a different language. But I never stopped learning. It was my way of keeping those memories, those connections alive." "And your grandmother?" Isabelle asked softly. "She died 2 years ago. Heart attack. 50 years working from dawn to dusk ended up killing her." Valérie closed her eyes tightly. "And I was left alone, with no formal education, no certificates to prove what I knew, just languages in my head, and no way to prove they were real." "So, you started working as a translator?" Isabelle completed. "I tried to get jobs at official agencies, but they all wanted university degrees, international certifications. No one wanted to give me even a chance to prove what I could do." The frustration was palpable in her voice. "So I started my own business. I offered my services online, charged less than the big agencies, and did impeccable work." "Then why are you here?" Valérie opened her eyes and looked directly at Isabelle. "Because someone decided it was impossible for a girl without a university education to do what I did. They reported my services as fraud, without even checking the quality of my work. And now I'm here, waiting to prove something I should never have had to prove." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. The door opened, and Officer Jenkins reappeared. "Dubois, you have a visitor. Consultation room. Valérie got off the bunk, confused. She hadn't called anyone. She had no one to call. The consultation room was a small space divided by a metal table. Sitting on the other side was Eleanor Vance, her public defender. But she wasn't alone. Next to her was a woman Valérie didn't know. Elegant, professional, with a leather briefcase on the table. Valérie, this is Dr. Anya Sharma, Eleanor introduced. She's a forensic psychologist. Crown Prosecutor Sterling requested a psychological evaluation before the next hearing. Valérie felt a knot forming in her stomach. Psychological evaluation? Why? Doctor, Sharma spoke in a calm, professional voice. It's standard procedure in cases where the accused exhibits behaviors that could be considered unusual. Your confrontation with Justice Mackenzie raised some flags. Flags? Valérie felt indignation rising. Defending myself is unusual behavior? It's not about that, Eleanor quickly intervened. Valérie, listen. The prosecutor is trying to build a profile that suggests you have tendencies towards pathological fantasy. They want to argue that you truly believe you speak these languages when in reality you don't. That's ridiculous. Valérie slammed her palm on the table. I'm not crazy. No one is saying you are. Dr. Sharma maintained her neutral tone. But I need to do my evaluation. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. For the next hour, Valérie answered question after question about her childhood, her parents' death, living with her grandmother, learning languages, feeling alone, her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. Doctor, Sharma took meticulous notes, her expression impossible to read. One last question, she finally said. Have you ever felt that people don't understand you? That you live in a different world from others? Valérie thought carefully before answering. Every day of my life, but not because I'm crazy, but because I've lived in worlds that most people will never experience. I've spoken in languages that most will never learn. I've seen how words can build bridges or raise walls. So yes, I live in a different world, but it's real. It's as real as the prejudice that brought me here. The doctor closed her notepad. Thank you for your cooperation, Valérie. I will submit my report before the hearing. When she left, Eleanor approached Valérie, her expression worried. There's something else you need to know. Justice Mackenzie contacted the provincial university, but it wasn't just to get evaluators. What do you mean? He investigated your background more thoroughly. He found something. Eleanor pulled some documents from her bag. Years ago, when you were 17, you applied for a scholarship at the International Language Academy. Do you remember? Valérie nodded slowly. They rejected me. They said my application was unrealistic because I claimed to speak too many languages for my age. Exactly. And Mackenzie is using that as evidence that you've been lying about your abilities for years. He argues it's a pattern of fraudulent behavior. The room seemed to shrink around Valérie. Every time she tried to move forward, the system pushed her back. Every attempt to prove her worth became another piece of evidence against her. Is there anything else? She asked, dreading the answer. Eleanor hesitated before continuing. The evaluators who are coming. Mackenzie specifically asked for the strictest professors, known for being extremely rigorous. They're not coming to give you a fair chance, Valérie. They're coming to dismantle you. The silence that followed was crushing. Valérie could feel the weight of the entire justice system pressing against her, trying to crush that spark of hope that still burned in her chest. How much time do I have? She finally asked. 2 more days. The hearing is the day after tomorrow. Then I need to use every second. Valérie stood up, her determination renewed despite everything. Eleanor, I need you to get me something. Books, study materials, in every language you can find. If they're going to make this difficult, then I'm going to prepare like never before in my life. Eleanor looked at her with a mixture of admiration and sadness. Valérie, even if you prove you speak those languages, the prosecutor has other charges. The clients who reported fraud, the complaints about incorrect translations. Incorrect translations? Valérie interrupted her. What incorrect translations? There are 3 clients who claim the translations you did contained serious errors that cost them money and reputation. Valérie felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. That's impossible. I checked every translation 3 times. I was meticulous. I would never have delivered something with serious errors. Do you have copies of those translations? All of them, on my computer, but the police confiscated it as evidence. Eleanor made a note. I'm going to request access to those files. If we can prove the translations were correct, that would dismantle part of the prosecutor's accusation. When Valérie returned to her cell, Isabelle was waiting with a curious expression. Bad news. Getting worse? Valérie slumped onto her bunk. Not only do I have to prove I speak 10 languages in front of professors who have already decided I'm lying, I also have to prove that translations I know I did correctly have no errors, and defend myself against a psychological evaluation that will probably paint me as delusional. Isabelle whistled softly. When you said you had fire, I wasn't kidding. But Valérie, are you sure you want to go through with this? You could accept a plea bargain, serve a shorter sentence, and give up? Valérie looked at the ceiling. Accept that the world is right and I am wrong? I can't, Isabelle. If I give up now, I would be betraying my grandmother. All those years of learning. All those girls who, like me, have talent, but no papers to prove it. Then rest, Isabelle said, turning off the cell light. Because in 2 days you're going to need every ounce of strength you have. In the darkness, Valérie closed her eyes, but couldn't sleep. Her mind reviewed vocabulary, grammar, idioms in each of the languages she had learned. But more than that, she thought of all the times she had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed. The world was about to see what she was capable of. She only hoped it would be enough. Dawn broke over the detention center with that heavy silence that only exists in places where freedom is a distant memory. Valérie hadn't slept. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind continued to process verb conjugations, grammatical structures, idiomatic expressions in Mandarin, Arabic, German, French. Isabelle snored softly in the lower bunk, a comforting sound amidst so much uncertainty. Valérie had spent the night whispering words softly, each language flowing like rivers converging into the ocean of her memory. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her concentration. It was too early for breakfast. The metal door opened, and Officer Jenkins appeared with a serious expression. Dubois, you have a visitor. Consultation room. Now. Isabelle woke up with a start. At this hour? Who visits someone before dawn? Valérie got off her bunk, her heart beginning to beat faster. She followed Jenkins through the empty corridors, the echo of their footsteps resonating like war drums. When they reached the consultation room, the surprise on Valérie's face was evident. Sitting on the other side of the table was an Asian man with an anxious expression and a business briefcase on his lap. She recognized him immediately. Mr. David Lee? Valérie whispered, incredulous. David Lee stood up abruptly, his hands visibly trembling. He was one of the 3 clients who had reported her translations as fraudulent. He worked for a technology company that needed documents translated from English to Mandarin for an expansion in China. Miss Dubois, I need to talk to you. His voice came out in gasps, as if each word cost him physical effort. I don't have much time. My lawyer doesn't know I'm here. Jenkins closed the door, but remained inside. Standard protocol for unofficially authorized visits. What are you doing here? Valérie sat down slowly, trying to process this surreal situation. Lee ran his hands over his face, and Valérie noticed the deep dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. I came to tell you the truth I should have told from the beginning. The silence that followed was so dense that Valérie could hear her own pulse. Your translations were perfect. Lee blurted out the words as if he had been holding his breath for months. Every document you translated for my company was impeccable, better than any professional agency we had used before. The partners in Beijing were impressed with the technical precision and cultural sensitivity. Valérie felt as if the ground was moving beneath her feet. Then why? Because my boss, the CEO, found out I had hired your services without verifying your university credentials. Lee lowered his gaze, shame evident in every line of his face. He threatened to fire me if I didn't find a way to justify why I had spent company funds on an uncertified translator. And he decided to destroy your life to save his job. Valérie felt a mixture of fury and vindication growing in her chest. It wasn't that simple. Lee looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Corporate counsel Robert Thorne, our company's lawyer, suggested we report the translations as defective. He said it was the only way to recover the money and protect the company from any legal liability. He suggested lying? Valérie's voice rose. He suggested protecting corporate interests, Lee corrected bitterly. In the business world, Miss Dubois, truth is secondary to financial survival. But I haven't been able to sleep since I signed that false statement. I have a daughter your age. Every time I look at her, I see your face in the news, being publicly humiliated for something you didn't do. Valérie took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Why are you telling me this now? Why not before the trial? Because I'm a coward, Lee admitted with a broken voice. Because I needed my job, my salary, my reputation. But seeing what they've done to you, Seeing Justice Mackenzie laughing at you on television, it was too much. My wife told me last night that she couldn't continue living with a man without honor, and she was right. He took a thick envelope from his briefcase. Here's everything. Copies of the original translations, with the approvals from our partners in Beijing, emails where they specifically praise your work, and my sworn affidavit, admitting I lied under corporate pressure. Valérie took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy, full of pages that could completely change her case. Mr. Lee, do you understand what this means for you? She asked softly. Admitting perjury could send you to prison. I know. Lee smiled sadly. But I prefer to be in prison with my honor intact than free as a liar. My daughter deserves a father she can be proud of. Jenkins approached the table. Sir, I need to escort you out. This visit is already irregular. Lee stood up, but before leaving, he looked directly into Valérie's eyes. Miss Dubois, you are extraordinary. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you'll permit me a piece of advice, when you're in that room tomorrow, don't just prove you speak those languages. Prove why it matters. Prove that real talent doesn't need certificates to be valid. When he left, Valérie remained alone in the room, clutching the envelope as if it were a lifeline. Tears she had been holding back for days finally began to fall. They were not tears of sadness, but of relief mixed with rage for all she had had to endure because of corporate lies. The door opened again, and Eleanor Vance rushed in, her hair disheveled and an expression of controlled panic. Valérie, what was that? Jenkins called me saying David Lee was here. What did he want? Valérie handed her the envelope. Our salvation. As Eleanor frantically reviewed the documents, her eyes widened with each page. This is incredible. With this, we can completely dismantle the fraud charges. We can prove that the translations were correct and that the accusations were fabricated. But will it be enough? Valérie asked. I still have to prove I speak the languages, and the prosecutor will probably say that Lee is lying now to help me. You're right. Eleanor sat down, her mind working at full speed. We need more. We need to find the other 2 clients who accused you. And how do we do that from here? Eleanor pulled out her cell phone. Leave it to me. I have contacts. If Lee had a crisis of conscience, maybe the others will too. For the next few hours, while Valérie was escorted back to her cell, Eleanor worked frantically, making calls, sending emails, moving every contact she had in her legal arsenal. Back in the cell, Isabelle watched Valérie with curiosity. Something changed, she said simply. You have a different expression. One of my accusers came to confess that he lied. Valérie sat down, still processing everything. It turns out my translations were perfect. They falsely accused me to protect corporate interests. Isabelle whistled softly. The system, protecting itself. Same old story. But this time, someone had the courage to tell the truth. Valérie looked out the small, high window. He risked everything to clear my name. And that gives you hope? It gives me more than hope. It gives me proof that I'm not crazy, that I'm not wrong, that the world is wrong about me. A metallic sound echoed down the hallway. It was time for the mobile library, a cart that passed twice a week with books for inmates. A young woman pushed the cart, stopping at each cell. When she reached cell 47, Valérie recognized her. It was Sophie Bouchard, a girl barely 19 whom she had seen in the dining hall. She had intelligent eyes and that particular sadness of someone who has seen too much too young. Any books you need? Sophie asked softly. Do you have anything in foreign languages? Valérie asked hopefully. Sophie's eyes lit up. Are you the girl who's going to prove she speaks 10 languages? 11, actually. I have something for you. Sophie looked nervously to both sides of the hallway before pulling out a paper-wrapped package. Your lawyer asked me to bring you this. I shouldn't, but well, I believe in second chances. Valérie unwrapped the package and found 6 books in different languages: Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, and Portuguese. They were not ordinary books, but complex legal technical texts. Your lawyer said to practice with these, Sophie whispered. The professors tomorrow are going to try to trip you up with specialized technical vocabulary. How do you know? Because one of them, Professor Marc Dubois, came here for a legal consultation a few days ago. I heard him talking to the director about how to unmask an impostor who claimed impossible linguistic abilities. Valérie's blood ran cold. Did he say anything else? He said he had prepared specialized technical texts in each language. Medical, legal, scientific vocabulary. Things that only someone with years of formal university study could know. Isabelle sat up in her bunk. That's cheating. They're setting up an exam designed for you to fail. It's not cheating if they never promise to be fair. Valérie opened the first book, her eyes scanning the pages in Mandarin. But I can learn. I've always been able to learn. You have less than 24 hours, Sophie pointed out. How are you going to memorize technical vocabulary in 6 languages in one day? Valérie looked at her with that fierce determination that had kept her alive her whole life. The same way I've done everything else, by not giving up. When Sophie left, Isabelle watched Valérie open book after book, her concentration absolute. You know what's most impressive about you? Isabelle said, after a long silence. It's not that you speak languages, it's that you never accept defeat as an option. My grandmother used to say, the world will tell you 1,000 times you can't. You only need to prove it once to show that you can. Valérie spent the rest of the day and all night immersed in those books. She barely ate, barely moved. Isabelle brought her water, reminded her to breathe. But Valérie was in another world, a world of words, meanings, linguistic connections. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the high window, Valérie closed the last book. Her eyes were red, her body trembled with exhaustion. But there was something different in her expression. Ready? Isabelle asked. Ready, Valérie replied. Jenkins arrived early. Dubois, it's time. Your lawyer is waiting. Today's the day. As she walked through the corridors towards the exit, other inmates began to bang on their cell doors. It wasn't a threatening sound, but one of support. Many of them had heard her story. Many of them had been judged for what the system thought they were, instead of for what they really were. Show them, someone shouted. Don't let them crush you. Another voice joined. Valérie felt a strange energy coursing through her body. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. All those anonymous faces behind the metal doors were reminders that there were more people like her, waiting for a chance to prove their truth. Eleanor was waiting for her in the processing area with something unexpected. A suitcase. What is this? Valérie asked. Your future, if all goes well. Eleanor opened the suitcase, revealing a professional outfit. You're not going into that room as an accused. You're going in as the professional you are. While Valérie changed, Eleanor gave her the latest news. I found the second client. He's willing to testify that his accusation was also false. The third one still hasn't responded, but 2 out of 3 is enough to create reasonable doubt. And the psychological evaluation? Eleanor grimaced. Dr. Sharma submitted her report. It's mixed. It doesn't say you're crazy, but it doesn't fully defend you either. It suggests you have an unconventional personality with high confidence in self-taught abilities. That's just a fancy way of saying they don't trust me. Exactly. That's why you need to be perfect today. Not just good, perfect. The transport vehicle took them to the courthouse. The building looked different in the dawn light, more imposing, more intimidating, like a Roman Colosseum where gladiators fought for their lives. But Valérie was no longer the same person who had entered there days ago. Now she had evidence, she had allies, and most importantly, she had the truth. The courtroom was even fuller than the first time. News cameras filled every permitted corner. Journalists whispered among themselves, and in the front row, 10 professors from the provincial university waited with expressions ranging from curiosity to open disdain. Justice Mackenzie entered with the same arrogance as always, but when his gaze met Valérie's, something changed in his eyes. Perhaps he recognized that this would not be the easy victory he had anticipated. Let the show begin, he muttered, banging his gavel. And so began the day that would change everything. Justice Mackenzie's gavel resonated like a gunshot in the packed courtroom. The collective murmur instantly faded, replaced by a tension so dense that the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Order in the court! Mackenzie pronounced the words with that authoritative tone he had perfected over decades on the bench. His eyes swept across the crowd before settling on the 10 professors seated in a special row in front of the bench. Professors from the provincial university, thank you for your presence. Today we will conduct an evaluation that, frankly, I consider a waste of time, but which the accused has insisted on carrying out. Valérie stood beside Eleanor, her posture erect despite the exhaustion she felt in every fiber of her being. 24 hours without sleep, studying technical vocabulary that most people would take years to master. But she was not most people. Professor Marc Dubois rose, adjusting his glasses with a gesture that conveyed academic superiority. He was a slender man with dark hair slicked back with gel, and that expression of someone who considers formal knowledge to be the only valid knowledge. Your Honor, he began in a clear, academic voice. My colleagues and I have prepared a series of rigorous evaluations. It's not simply about conversing in different languages, but about demonstrating technical mastery, deep cultural understanding, and specialized translation ability. Proceed. Mackenzie gestured with his hand, leaning back in his chair as if he were about to witness a cheap magic show. Dubois opened a thick folder. Miss Dubois, we will begin with Mandarin. Professor Akiko Tanaka, though a specialist in Japanese, also masters Mandarin and will evaluate this first section. A middle-aged Asian woman stood up. Professor Tanaka had a serene presence, but her gaze was analytical, dissecting Valérie with every passing second. The professor spoke in perfect fluent Mandarin, asking Valérie to read a medical text and then explain its meaning in English. She handed her a document. Valérie took the paper. It was a complex medical text about cardiovascular procedures, full of technical terminology that would make any professional translator sweat. The room held its breath. Valérie read the document in silence for 30 seconds. Then, without hesitation, she began to speak in fluent Mandarin. Her pronunciation impeccable, her tones precise. She not only read the text but explained it, adding cultural context about how certain Chinese medical terms differ in concept from Western ones. Then she switched to English without pause, translating not only the words, but the deep meaning, explaining the medical implications with a level of detail that left even Professor Tanaka speechless. The professor murmured something in Mandarin to Dubois, commenting that Valérie's pronunciation was perfect and impossible for someone without formal training. I know, Valérie replied in the same language, looking directly at Tanaka. Then she switched to English. Because I learned from the Chen family, diplomats who lived 6 years in Beijing. Their young daughter taught me not only the language but the songs, the games, the ways of thinking. Language is not just words, Professor. It is soul. A murmur ran through the room. Journalist Marco Delgado scribbled frantically in his notepad. This was journalistic gold. Next language, Dubois said brusquely, clearly uncomfortable with what he had just witnessed. German. Professor Klaus Schmidt. Schmidt was a corpulent man, with a blonde beard and a stern, typically Germanic expression. He stood up and spoke in clipped German, with a deliberately complicated accent, asking Valérie to explain the clauses of a legal contract and its legal implications. He handed her a dense legal contract, full of German legal jargon, which even native lawyers would find challenging. Valérie read it, and again, her response was more than perfect. She not only translated, but identified possible legal issues in the contract, pointed out linguistic ambiguities that could cause disputes, and did it all while alternating fluidly between German and English. Schmidt looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and bewilderment. He asked her in German where she had learned all that. Valérie replied in fluent German before translating into English. From the Schneider family. Mr. Schneider was an international lawyer. His wife would let me sit in his office while he worked. I was 10 years old and read his contracts while he thought I was just drawing. I learned that legal German is like a puzzle where every word has exact weight. Eleanor Vance watched with tears in her eyes. This was more than she had hoped for. Valérie was not just demonstrating competence, she was demonstrating mastery. Arabic. Dubois practically spat the word. Professor Leila Hassan. Hassan was an elegant woman with an intelligent, calculating expression. She spoke in classical Arabic, the kind used in religious and academic texts. Deliberately archaic and complex. She asked Valérie to read a religious text and explain its deep philosophical meaning. It was a text with complex philosophical commentaries. Valérie closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was something different in her expression. She began to recite in Arabic, her voice taking on that particular melodic cadence of well-spoken language. She not only translated the text, but explained the multiple layers of interpretation, the historical references, the theological debates the passage had generated for centuries. She spoke about how classical Arabic differs from modern Arabic, about the inherent poetry in each verse. Hassan stood up, visibly moved. How is this possible? This requires years of theological study. The Al-Rahman family, Valérie replied softly in English. The father was an imam. He taught me that Arabic is not just a language, it is a way of seeing the universe, that every word has roots, history, connection with other words. It is a language that breathes poetry. Justice Mackenzie was no longer leaning back in his chair. He was leaning forward. His expression had changed from mockery to something that might have been involuntary respect. One by one, the professors presented their challenges. Russian with Professor Anton Volkov, who asked her to recite classical literature and explain complex literary symbolism. French with culinary and wine terminology so specific that only a professional sommelier or chef would know. Italian with opera and music. Brazilian Portuguese with complex regional idioms. Japanese with multiple writing systems. Korean with intricate levels of formality. Each time, Valérie not only met but exceeded expectations. And each time she added that personal dimension, that learning story that revealed not only technical knowledge, but deep understanding and genuine love for each language. When Professor Volkov asked her to explain a passage of classic Russian literature, Valérie not only translated the words but captured the melancholic soul of the text, explaining historical and emotional contexts that only someone truly immersed in Russian culture could understand. The Ivanov family, she explained. Mr. Ivanov was a literature professor. He read Dostoevsky to me while his wife made borscht. I was 12 years old and cried with the stories. He told me that if you can't feel the Russian suffering in the words, you're not truly reading the masters. The professor evaluating French presented her with a text about wines with terminology so specialized that it seemed designed to make even professional translators fail. Valérie not only identified every grape variety, every wine region mentioned, but explained the cultural subtleties of why certain French words to describe wine have no exact translation into English. Monsieur Dubois was a sommelier, she explained with a nostalgic smile. He let me smell the wines while he worked. He said that the French of wine is liquid poetry. Every word evokes earth, sun, time. It is not translated, it is felt. But then came the moment that would change everything. The last language was Hebrew. Dubois, who also mastered Hebrew in addition to English, personally stood up for this evaluation. He had saved what he considered his masterstroke for last. Miss Dubois, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This last text is particularly challenging. It is an ancient philosophical treatise on ethics and justice, extremely complex, even for dedicated scholars. He handed her the document. Valérie began to read, and suddenly her expression changed. It was not confusion or difficulty, it was recognition. Professor Dubois, she said slowly. This text, I know this text. You know it? Dubois smiled smugly. I highly doubt you've had access to ancient Hebrew philosophical manuscripts. No, the manuscript. Valérie looked up, her eyes gleaming with something dangerous. I know the translation, because I did it. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to stop making noise. Excuse me? Dubois blinked. Valérie pointed to the document. 6 years ago, when I was 17, I worked for an online translation service under a pseudonym. An anonymous client requested the translation of this philosophical treatise from ancient Hebrew to modern English. He paid well, but asked for complete anonymity. I spent 3 weeks working on this, researching every word, every concept. It was one of my first professional jobs. She turned to Dubois, her voice gaining strength. And you, Professor Dubois, published an academic article 4 years ago, titled New Interpretations of Hebrew Ethical Texts. I read that article. You used my translation word for word, without giving credit. The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. Dubois visibly paled. That's an absurd accusation, he stammered. Do you have any proof? I have all my work files, Valérie responded calmly, including translation notes, preliminary versions, correspondence with the client, all stored on my computer, the same computer that is in the possession of the prosecution as evidence. Eleanor Vance jumped up. Your Honor, I request immediate access to those digital files. If what my client says is true, this not only demonstrates her competence, but exposes academic plagiarism. Crown Prosecutor Sterling looked like a cornered animal. Your Honor, this is a distraction. It is not relevant to the case. Not relevant? Mackenzie finally found his voice. Mr. Sterling, if the accused can demonstrate that one of the evaluators I chose used her work without credit, that is extremely relevant to this case. It shows that she is not only competent, but has been competent for years. He turned to Dubois, his expression now cold. Professor Dubois, do you have anything to say? Dubois opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The other professors looked at him with mixtures of shock and disgust. In the academic world, plagiarism was the unforgivable sin. I received that translation from a colleague. I didn't know it was from an online service. I assumed it was public work. Assumid? Professor Hassan stood up, her voice sharp. Professor Dubois, academic protocol requires verifying the source of all material. This is basic, Professor Schmidt added in a severe tone. If this is true, The provincial university will have to formally investigate. Mackenzie slammed his gavel. Order! Constable O'Connell. Bring the evidence computer. Now. As they waited, Valérie remained standing, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. She had waited 6 years for this moment. 6 years since she saw her work published under another's name. She never thought justice would come this way, but life had strange ways of closing circles. O'Connell returned with the laptop in an evidence bag. The court technician turned it on, and under judicial supervision, Eleanor navigated to the files Valérie indicated. It was all there. The preliminary versions of the translation dated 6 years ago, the detailed notes explaining each translation decision, the emails with the client, and most damning, the final version, identical word for word to what Dubois had published in his supposedly original article. Mackenzie personally examined the files, his expression growing darker with each document he reviewed. Finally, he looked up at Dubois. Professor, I strongly suggest you contact your union. You're going to need legal representation. He turned to the other 9 professors. Does anyone else have doubts about Miss Dubois' linguistic competence? One by one, each professor shook their head. Professor Hassan even stood up. Your Honor, in my 20 years evaluating linguistic competence, I have never seen anyone with the mastery this young woman has demonstrated today. She not only speaks these languages, she lives them. She understands them at levels most academics can only aspire to. And she did it without resources, without privileges, just with determination and a genuine love for learning. Hassan's words resonated in the room. Mackenzie leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. For the first time in decades, he seemed truly unsure how to proceed. Mr. Sterling, he finally said, do you have anything else to present? The prosecutor slowly stood up. He knew he had lost. Your Honor, in light of these developments, and considering that 2 of the 3 plaintiff clients have withdrawn their accusations and confessed to lying under corporate pressure, the prosecution requests to withdraw all charges. The murmur in the room turned into a roar. Mackenzie slammed his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in my court! When silence returned, Mackenzie looked at Valérie for a long moment. In his eyes was something that had never been there before. I apologize, Miss Dubois, he began, his voice unusually soft. This court owes you an apology. I owe you an apology. I allowed prejudice to cloud my judgment. I assume that extraordinary talent requires institutional validation, when you have demonstrated that true talent transcends institutions. He paused, as if the next words cost him physical effort to utter. All charges against you are withdrawn. You are free of all accusation. Furthermore, I order that your computer and all your personal effects be returned to you immediately. He slammed the gavel one last time. This case is closed. The room erupted in applause. Eleanor hugged Valérie, both crying. Journalists ran towards the exits to publish the news. Professors surrounded Valérie, offering apologies, job offers, academic opportunities, but Valérie could only think of one thing. Finally, after a lifetime of being underestimated, the world had heard her voice, and that voice had spoken in 11 languages. The doors of the Maplewood Detention Center opened with a metallic creak that sounded like heavenly music. Valérie took her first step as a free woman in days that had felt like years. The afternoon sun hit her face with an intensity that almost made her recoil. Freedom, vindication, justice. But the scene awaiting her outside was not the tranquility she had imagined. Dozens of journalists swarmed towards her like waves breaking against the shore, cameras flashing, microphones extending like tentacles, voices shouting questions that blended into an incomprehensible chaos. Miss Dubois, how do you feel? Is Valérie going to sue Justice Mackenzie? Tell us about Professor Dubois. Is it true you speak 11 languages? Eleanor appeared by her side, forming a protective shield with her body, as they tried to push their way towards the waiting vehicle. But before they could advance 2 meters, an elegant woman stood directly in their path. She was of imposing stature, perfectly coiffed silver hair, a suit that screamed power and money. Linda Harrington, according to the corporate ID hanging around her neck, CEO of Harrington Global Language Solutions, Miss Dubois. Her voice cut through the surrounding noise with natural authority. I'm Linda Harrington. I need to speak with you now. Miss Harrington, my client has just been released, Eleanor intervened. This is not the appropriate time. I understand perfectly, but what I have to tell you cannot wait. Harrington looked directly at Valérie, completely ignoring Eleanor. Your case has generated international attention. I have 17 job offers from different countries for you, and something more important, Information about your grandmother that I think you'll want to hear." Valérie stopped dead in her tracks. "My grandmother? What do you know about my grandmother?" "Not here." Harrington pointed to a black limousine parked discreetly half a block away. "5 minutes of your time. If afterwards you want to leave, I will personally take you wherever you wish." Eleanor squeezed Valérie's arm in warning, but there was something in Harrington's eyes that was not threatening. It was urgency mixed with respect. "All right," Valérie accepted. 5 minutes. Inside the limousine, away from the chaos of journalists, Harrington handed her a leather folder. 20 years ago, I was director of human resources at one of the country's most prestigious translation agencies. Your grandmother, Lucie Dubois, applied for a position. We rejected her. Valérie felt a pang of pain in her chest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we made the same mistake the system made with you." Lucie spoke 6 languages fluently, but had no university degrees. We rejected her without even properly evaluating her. She wrote me a letter after that interview, a letter I kept for 2 decades because I was too ashamed to reread it. Harrington took a yellowed envelope from the folder. The handwriting was her grandmother's. Valérie would recognize it anywhere. "Read it," Harrington insisted. With trembling hands, Valérie opened the envelope and began to read. Her grandmother's words flowed from the page like a river of wisdom and pain. "Dear Miss Harrington, I don't blame you for rejecting me. The world runs on papers, not abilities. But I want you to know that I will dedicate my life to ensuring that my granddaughter never has to beg for opportunities she deserves. I will teach her everything I know, and someday, when she succeeds, I hope you remember that talent does not need external validation to be real." Valérie finished reading, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her grandmother had always known, always planned to prepare her for a world that would reject them both. "When I saw your case in the news," Harrington continued softly, "I knew immediately who you were, Lucie's granddaughter, the child she spoke of in that letter, and I realized I had the opportunity to correct a mistake I made 2 decades ago." "What do you want from me?" Valérie asked directly. "I want to hire you, not as a common translator, but as director of unconventional talent. Your job will be to identify and recruit people like you, people with extraordinary abilities, but without traditional credentials, people the system ignores." The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true, but something in Harrington's expression told Valérie there was more. "What else?" she pressed. Harrington smiled slightly. "You're perceptive. Good, there's something else. Your grandmother worked for many diplomatic families, as you know. But there's one family in particular, the Morrisons, for whom she worked for the last 5 years of her life. They left the country abruptly 3 years ago, and they left something for you. Something your grandmother asked them to keep until you were ready. Mr. Morrison contacted me yesterday after seeing your case in the news. He's in the city. He wants to meet you." Before Valérie could respond, her phone, just returned by the police, began to ring incessantly. Missed calls, text messages, social media notifications exploding. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from an unknown number with an international prefix. "Miss Dubois, I am Agent Samuel Cross from the International Refugee Assistance Agency. Your story has resonated with millions. We have a proposal that could change lives. Please contact me urgently." Eleanor, who had been checking her own phone, looked up with an expression of shock. "Valérie, you need to see this." She showed her screen. The video of the hearing had gone viral. More than 15 million views in less than 6 hours. The hashtag number Justice for Valérie was trending worldwide. But it wasn't just that. There was another video published just minutes ago. Someone had leaked the security footage from the detention center. In it, Valérie was clearly seen studying all night, murmuring in different languages, preparing with a determination that bordered on superhuman. "The whole world is talking about you," Eleanor murmured. "You're a symbol now." "I don't want to be a symbol," Valérie responded in a tired voice. "I just want to live my life." Too late for that, Harrington intervened pragmatically. "You now have a platform. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" The phone rang again. This time, it was a number Valérie recognized. "Isabelle, her cellmate." "Valérie, you need to come. It's urgent." "Isabelle, what's wrong?" "It's about the center director. Turns out he has secrets too, and I think they're connected to your grandmother, but I can't talk on the phone, you have to come." The call cut abruptly. Valérie looked at Eleanor with growing alarm. Something's wrong. Isabelle sounded scared. Before they could decide what to do, another figure appeared at the limousine window. An older man in his late 60s, with a gentle but urgent expression, tapped softly on the glass. Harrington lowered the window. "Dr. Thorne? Miss Harrington, thank you for contacting me." The man spoke with a refined British accent. "Miss Dubois, I am Dr. Julian Thorne. I worked as the Morrison family's personal physician for years. I also attended to your grandmother Lucy in her final months." Valérie stepped out of the limousine, feeling the world spinning too fast. "You knew my grandmother?" "I knew her very well, and there are things about her death that you need to know. Things she made me promise to tell you when the time was right." "What things?" Dr. Thorne looked nervously around him. "Not here. There are people who would prefer certain information remain buried. Your grandmother didn't die of a simple heart attack, Miss Dubois. There were complications she kept secret. Complications related to something she discovered while working for the Morrisons." Valérie's heart began to pound. What did she discover? Documents, sensitive information about trafficking networks that use diplomatic families as cover. Your grandmother reported them to the appropriate authorities, but she died before she could formally testify. Valérie's world stopped. "Are you saying my grandmother was?" "I don't know for certain," the doctor quickly interrupted. "What I do know is that she left evidence stored, evidence that the Morrisons protected after her death. And now that you are in the public eye, there are people who will want to make sure that evidence never comes to light." Eleanor stood protectively beside Valérie. "Dr. Thorne, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" "I have Lucy's complete medical records, and I have the letters she wrote to me in her final days. Letters where she specifically mentions that if anything happened to her, I should contact her granddaughter when she was strong enough to handle the truth." He took a thick envelope from his briefcase. "This is just the beginning, Miss Dubois. Your grandmother meticulously documented everything. Names, dates, trafficking routes. She stored it all in a safe deposit box at an international bank, and you are the only person authorized to open it." Valérie took the envelope, feeling its weight, not just physical, but emotional. "Where is that box?" "Geneva, Switzerland, Helvetia International Bank. Your grandmother gave me the exact instructions before she died," she said. "When Valérie proves to the world what she is capable of, when she can no longer be ignored or silenced, then she will be ready to know the whole truth." The words resonated in the silence of the limousine. Her whole life, Valérie had thought her grandmother was simply a domestic worker who loved languages. But now she was discovering that she had been much more. A woman who had seen injustices and had had the courage to confront them, even knowing the price she might pay. "Is there anything else?" Dr. Thorne added, his expression growing even more serious. "The third client who accused you, the one who never withdrew his charges, his name is Richard Blackwood. He works for a private security corporation with deep connections in diplomatic circles. I don't think it's a coincidence that he was the only one who maintained the accusations until the end." "Are you suggesting that my accusation was orchestrated?" Valérie felt a shiver run down her spine. "I am suggesting that when your case became public, certain people saw an opportunity to discredit you before you could become a problem. Before you could discover what your grandmother knew." Eleanor grabbed her phone. "We need police protection now." But before she could make the call, a black van stopped abruptly in front of the limousine. A middle-aged man with a serious expression, a federal ID hanging from his neck, stepped out. "I'm Agent Samuel Cross, Miss Dubois. I need you to come with me. Your life may be in danger." "How did you know where to find me?" Valérie asked, her survival instinct activating. "Because we have been monitoring communications related to your case, and we just intercepted a very disturbing conversation. There's an active contract on you. Someone wants to make sure you never reach Geneva." And the world Valérie had just recovered was about to become much more dangerous, and the answers she sought were thousands of kilometers away in a safe deposit box that contained secrets someone was willing to kill to protect. The decision was instantaneous. Valérie looked Agent Cross directly in the eyes. "I won't go anywhere until I talk to Isabelle. She needs me, Miss Dubois. You don't understand the gravity," Cross insisted. "And there's a friend who risked everything to help me when no one else would," Valérie responded firmly. "I won't abandon her now." Eleanor touched her arm. "Valérie, maybe you should listen to the agent. I'll go with you, doctor." Thorne unexpectedly intervened. "If there's a connection between the center director and what your grandmother discovered, you need to know it, and I can help protect you." Harrington closed her phone. "I have contacts in private security. I can have a team there in 10 minutes. Cross sighed, recognizing he had lost this battle. "All right, but I'm coming with you. And if it gets dangerous, we're leaving immediately." 15 minutes later, they were back at the Maplewood Detention Center. The building Valérie had left with relief now greeted her with a sense of threat she hadn't felt before. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows in the white hallways. Officer Daniela Ross, a young guard with a kind expression who had always been gentle with Valérie, awaited them at the entrance. "Miss Dubois, thank you for coming," she whispered nervously. "Isabelle is very agitated. She keeps saying the director has something to do with your grandmother. I don't understand what she means, but she insists she will only talk to you." "Where is Director Beaumont?" Cross asked in a professional tone. "In his office. He's been making calls all day. Since Miss Dubois' case went viral, he's extremely nervous." Ross guided them through corridors Valérie knew too well. When they reached cell 47C, Isabelle was sitting on her bunk, hugging her knees with an expression that mixed fear and determination. She jumped up when the door opened. "Thank goodness you came. I thought maybe you wouldn't after everything you went through here." "Isabelle, what's wrong? What did you discover?" Isabelle looked nervously at the others present. Cross showed his federal identification. "Everything you say here is protected. If you have relevant information, we need to hear it." Isabelle took a deep breath. 2 days ago, I was cleaning near Director Beaumont's office. The door was ajar, and I overheard a phone conversation. He was talking to someone about Valérie. He was saying things like, "The old woman was a problem, and the granddaughter can't know what she found." Valérie's heart stopped. "The old woman? He meant my grandmother?" "That's what I thought at first, but I wasn't sure." Then, today after you were released, he was more agitated. He made another call. This time I heard clearly. He mentioned the name Lucie Dubois, and something about documents that should never have reached her granddaughter's hands. Dr. Thorne stepped forward. "Did Isabelle mention anything about the Morrison families or international networks?" "Yes." Isabelle nodded vigorously. "He said the Morrisons were foolish for keeping those papers, that they should have destroyed them when they had the chance." Cross pulled out his phone and began making urgent calls. Eleanor sat down, her mind working at full speed, processing the legal implications. But Valérie could only feel one thing: rage. Rage that her grandmother had been put in danger. Rage that possibly her death had not been natural. Rage that even now, years later, the shadows of the past continued to haunt them. "I need to talk to him," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I need to talk to Beaumont now." "Valérie, that's not prudent," Eleanor warned. "I don't care about prudence." Valérie turned to Cross. "You're a federal agent. You can make it official." "I need answers about my grandmother." Cross considered for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll ask some questions, but you come with me, and if it gets dangerous, we're leaving." Director Arthur Beaumont's office was on the 3rd floor. He was a thick-set man with thinning hair and the kind of nervousness that only guilt can generate. When Cross entered, showing his federal identification, the color drained from his face. "Agent, how can I help you?" His voice trembled slightly. "Director Beaumont, I have some questions about Lucie Dubois." The director blinked repeatedly. "Lucie Dubois? I don't know anyone by that name." "Leah." Valérie entered the office, ignoring Cross's attempt to stop her. "My grandmother worked cleaning this center during her last year of life." "You knew her, and it seems you also knew what she had discovered." Beaumont stood up abruptly. "Miss, I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let me refresh your memory." Cross pulled out his recorder. "I have witnesses who heard you talking about the old woman and about documents. Would you like to explain that to me?" The director began to sweat visibly. His eyes darted between Cross, Valérie, and the door, like a trapped animal looking for escape. I just worked here. I didn't know anything about what she did outside, but you did know something." Valérie leaned over the desk. "My grandmother died 2 years ago. Her death was sudden, convenient, just before she could testify about what she had discovered." "I had nothing to do with her death," Beaumont shouted, losing his composure. "It was her heart. The doctors said so." "So you did know her," Cross observed coldly. "A moment ago you said you didn't know anyone by that name." Beaumont slumped into his chair, defeated. All right, I knew Lucie. She worked here cleaning for months. She was a good woman, quiet, but one day she came to me with information. Dangerous information." "What information?" Valérie felt tears threatening to come, but she held them back with willpower. She said that while working for diplomatic families, she had seen things. Documents about people being moved illegally, families used as cover for criminal operations. She showed me copies. She asked me to help her report it to the appropriate authorities. "And you did?" Beaumont lowered his gaze. unable to face Valérie's eyes. I told her I would, but I was scared. The people involved were powerful, they had connections, they had money. So I reported her intentions to someone else. The silence that fell in the office was heavier than any verbal accusation. "You betrayed her," Valérie whispered the words, barely audible. "My grandmother trusted you, and you sold her out. I didn't know what they were going to do." Beaumont sobbed openly now. "They just told me they would keep an eye on her, that they would make sure she didn't cause trouble. I never thought that they would kill her." Valérie finished the sentence. "I don't know if they did." Beaumont was sobbing openly now. Her death was natural according to all reports. But I always wondered, I always lived with that doubt. Cross was already on the phone, requesting forensic teams, arrest warrants, full investigations. But Valérie could barely hear anything beyond the roar of blood in her ears. "Doctor," Thorne placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Valérie, there's something else you need to know. Something your grandmother gave me before she died." From his briefcase, he took out a small, time-worn envelope. "She asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I think this is the moment." With trembling hands, Valérie opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in her grandmother's hand, the same handwriting she had seen in cookbooks, in shopping notes, in messages of maternal love. "My dearest Valérie," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. It means Dr. Thorne kept his promise, and it means you are finally strong enough to know the whole truth. Throughout your life, I taught you languages. I taught you that words have power, that communication builds bridges, that understanding others is understanding the world. But I never told you why it was so important to me that you learn. When I was young, I witnessed injustices I couldn't stop. I saw people exploited, families separated, innocents harmed, and I couldn't do anything because I had no power, no voice, no way to be heard. But you, my love, you have something I never had. You have the gift of tongues. You can speak for those who have no voice. You can translate not just words, but injustices into justice, silence into truth. The documents I left in Geneva are not just evidence of crimes. They are voices of people who need to be heard, and you are the only one who can give them that voice. I know the road will be difficult. I know there will be people who will try to silence you, just as they tried to silence me. But I also know that you are stronger than I ever was. Because you not only have knowledge, you have courage. Don't cry for me, my little one. If my heart stops before I can see your triumph, I will know it was because it gave everything to prepare you. And that is enough. Every language I taught you, every story I shared, every moment we spent together was preparing you for this moment, for when the world would finally listen to you. Now go to Geneva, open that box, tell those stories, give voice to the silenced, and when you do, you will know that your grandmother is proud, not because you speak 10 or 20 languages, but because you chose to use your gift for something bigger than yourself. I love you, my child. I always loved you. I will always love you. Your grandmother Lucie." Valérie finished reading, and the tears she had held back for days finally flowed freely. They were not tears of sadness only, but of understanding, of purpose, of love that transcended even death. Isabelle hugged her, crying too. Eleanor had tears rolling down her cheeks. Even Cross, the hardened federal agent, had to discreetly wipe his eyes. Dr. Thorne spoke softly. "Your grandmother knew her time was limited. Her heart was weak, and the stress of what she had discovered worsened it. But she didn't stop. She kept documenting, kept gathering evidence, kept fighting because she knew you would continue her work." Valérie folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest as if it were her grandmother's embrace. "I'll go to Geneva," she said, her voice clear despite the tears. "I'll finish what she started." "You won't go alone." Harrington entered the office, her expression determined. "My company has offices in Switzerland. You'll have all the protection and resources you need. And I'm coming with you," Eleanor added, "as your lawyer and your friend." "Me too," Isabelle said surprisingly. "I'm being released in 2 days, and after what they did to your grandmother, I want to help." Cross closed his phone. "The RCMP is interested in this case. You'll have federal protection during the trip." And he turned to the sobbing director. "Beaumont, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy." As Beaumont was escorted out of his office in handcuffs, Valérie felt something change within her. She was no longer just a young woman trying to prove her worth. She was the heir to a legacy of courage and justice. Her grandmother had planted seeds of hope in the form of languages. Now those seeds had grown into something more powerful, a voice that could not be silenced. At that moment, Harrington's phone rang. She answered briefly, her expression turning serious. "It's Mrs. Morrison. She's in the city. She says she has something else your grandmother left for you, something she didn't even trust to the bank. She wants to meet you tonight." Valérie nodded. Each revelation brought her closer to fully understanding who her grandmother had been and what she had sacrificed. "Then, let's go," she said. "There's no time to lose, because somewhere, in a safe deposit box in Geneva, truths awaited that would change lives." And Valérie Dubois was ready to give them voice. The hotel where Mrs. Margaret Morrison was staying was one of those places that whispered stories of lives lived with elegance and purpose. Valérie, accompanied by Eleanor, Dr. Thorne, and Harrington, was welcomed into a suite with a view of the illuminated city. Margaret Morrison was a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, blue eyes that had seen too much of the world, and that dignity that only comes from a life dedicated to serving something greater than oneself. When she saw Valérie, her eyes filled with tears. "You are exactly as she said you would be," Margaret whispered, taking Valérie's hands in hers. "Lucie spoke of you every day. She said you were her masterpiece, her living legacy." "Mrs. Morrison, what do you know about my grandmother?" Margaret invited them to sit. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared tea. "Your grandmother Lucie worked for my family for 5 years. She wasn't just our employee, she was part of our family. My husband was a British ambassador, and Lucie was with us at every posting. But what no one knew is that Lucie had a special gift." "What gift?" "She could read people, understand intentions, and her knowledge of languages allowed her to overhear conversations others believed private." Margaret paused, her eyes distant with memories. "One night, during a diplomatic reception at our home, Lucie was serving when she overheard a conversation in Russian between 2 diplomats. They were discussing a network that used diplomatic families as cover to move people against their will. The silence in the room was absolute. Lucie came to me that night, trembling. She told me everything. My husband and I were horrified. He wanted to report it immediately, but Lucie insisted on gathering more evidence first. For months, she meticulously documented everything: names, dates, routes. She used her invisible position to be present in meetings where no one thought she understood what they were saying. "And why didn't you report it when you had enough evidence?" Margaret got up and went to a small chest on the table. "Because we discovered that the network had connections at high levels of multiple governments. We didn't know who to trust. Then my husband died. A sudden heart attack during a diplomatic meeting." Her voice broke. "Officially, it was his heart. But I have always wondered. Just before he died, he had said he was ready to expose everything, regardless of the consequences. Lucie was afraid after that," Margaret continued. "Afraid that the same thing would happen to her, but not afraid for herself, but afraid of leaving you alone, Valérie. So she gave me this." She opened the chest and made me promise that I would only give it to you when you were strong enough, when the world was ready to listen to you. From the chest, she took out a small external hard drive and a thick envelope. "Here's everything. Audio recordings of diplomatic meetings where these operations were discussed, photographs, original documents, and most importantly, testimonies from victims Lucia met and secretly helped for years." Valérie took the drive with trembling hands. It was small, but it contained the weight of entire lives. "Is there anything else?" Margaret added softly. "The box in Geneva contains the documentary evidence, but this," she pointed to the drive, "contains the voices, the real stories of people who were silenced. Lucie recorded them with permission in their own languages. She knew you would be the one who would finally translate them, who would give them voice to the world." That night, Valérie barely slept. With headphones on, she listened hour after hour to the recordings. Voices in Mandarin, in Arabic, in Russian, in languages she knew intimately. Stories of separated families, of broken promises, of shattered hopes. And in each recording, at the end, was her grandmother's voice, her maternal warning, promising that their stories would be told. When dawn broke, Valérie had dry tears on her cheeks, but renewed fire in her soul. The flight to Geneva departed the next day. Valérie traveled with Eleanor, Isabelle, who had been released as promised, Harrington, and a security escort coordinated by Agent Cross. The RCMP had discovered that Richard Blackwood, the third client, was actually a private security operative hired to discredit Valérie before she became a public voice. He was arrested while attempting to leave the country. Geneva greeted them with gray skies, but with promises of justice. The Helvetia International Bank was a fortress of marble and steel, designed to protect secrets for generations. In a private room with a Swiss notary present, Valérie opened safe deposit box number 4721. Inside were meticulously organized folders, each labeled in her grandmother's handwriting, with names, dates, locations. But what most struck Valérie was finding a photo album at the bottom of the box, photos of herself through the years, her first day of school, learning to write in Arabic, reading books in French. Each photo had a note from her grandmother on the back. The last photo was of Valérie at 16, smiling while holding a certificate from an online translation course. The note read, "Today I knew you were ready. It just remained for the world to be ready too." Valérie hugged the album to her chest, sobbing. Eleanor hugged her, then Isabelle, then everyone present. It was a moment of pain and love intertwined so deeply that there were no words in any language to adequately describe it. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Valérie, with the help of Eleanor and an international legal team, presented all the evidence to the International Court of Justice. The case caused an earthquake in diplomatic circles. 3 international networks were dismantled. 17 corrupt officials were arrested in 6 different countries. But more important than the arrests was what Valérie did with the recordings. She created a documentary titled Voices of Silence. In it, she personally translated each testimony, giving voice to those who had been silenced. She not only translated words, but captured emotions, cultural context, the essential humanity of each story. The documentary went globally viral. Over 100 million views in the first week. Governments were forced to respond. Policies changed. Lives were saved. Ambassador Marcus Thorne from the United Nations personally contacted Valérie. "Miss Dubois, your work has exposed injustices that governments ignored for decades. On behalf of the United Nations, I would like to offer you a position as a special human rights translator. Your job would be to give voice to people the world needs to hear." Valérie accepted, but with one condition, that the position include a program to identify and train other young talents without formal credentials. Real talent, she argued, should not need institutional validation to be recognized. Her proposal was unanimously accepted. 6 months after the day Valérie had been arrested, she stood in the same courthouse where she had once been humiliated. But this time, she was not an accused, but a guest speaker at an international conference on linguistic justice. Justice Harrison Mackenzie was present at the hearing. He had retired early after his handling of Valérie's case generated investigations into other cases where he may have allowed prejudices to affect his judgment. At the end of her speech, Mackenzie approached her. "Miss Dubois," his voice was humble, so different from the arrogant man he had been. "No apology is enough for how I treated you. But I want you to know that your case changed my life. It forced me to confront prejudices I didn't even know I had. I am now working with the justice system to implement reforms that prevent other judges from making the same mistakes I made." "Justice Mackenzie," Valérie responded, "forgiveness does not erase harm, but it opens paths to something better. Your recognition means more than your apologies, because it shows that people can change, learn, grow." They shook hands, and in that gesture there was healing, not only for them, but as a symbol of what the justice system could become. Isabelle had rebuilt her life with Harrington's help. She now worked coordinating rehabilitation programs for unjustly incarcerated people. "You gave me hope when I had none," she told Valérie. "Now I want to give that same hope to others." Eleanor Vance received national recognition as Public Defender of the Year, but what she was most proud of was not the awards, but the letters she received from grateful clients, inspired by her passionate defense of Valérie. Professor Marc Dubois resigned from his position after a university investigation confirmed multiple cases of plagiarism. His downfall served as a warning to other academics about the importance of integrity. David Lee, the engineer who had had the courage to confess first, established a foundation dedicated to supporting unconventional talents. "Valérie taught me that honor is worth more than money or position," he explained in an interview. Sophie, the young woman from the detention center who had risked her job to help Valérie, received a full scholarship to study social work, sponsored by the program Valérie had established. 1 year after the day Valérie had been arrested, she stood in front of the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She had traveled from Geneva specifically for this moment. She placed fresh flowers on the grave and knelt. "Grandma," she spoke softly, "I finished what you started. The voices you helped protect are now being heard by the whole world. The networks you documented were dismantled. The people who tried to silence us failed." A gentle breeze moved the leaves of nearby trees, as if nature itself was listening. But more than that. Grandma, I finally understood why you taught me all those languages. It wasn't just about words, it was about empathy, about connection, about understanding that every person, regardless of their language or origin, has a story that deserves to be heard. Valérie took the photo album from her bag, the one she had found in the safe deposit box. She opened it to the last page where she had pasted a new photo. It was of herself, standing in front of the United Nations, surrounded by people from all corners of the world, people whose stories she had translated, whose voices she had amplified. Look, Grandma, this is what we built together. Your sacrifice was not in vain. Your legacy lives in every person who now has a voice, thanks to what you taught me. As the sun set, Valérie stayed there, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Her grandmother had planted seeds of hope in the form of languages. Those seeds had grown into a garden of justice that would continue to bloom long after they were both gone. The next day, Valérie gave her first class in the program she had created. 30 young people from diverse backgrounds, all with extraordinary talents, but without formal credentials, looked at her with hope and admiration. My grandmother used to tell me, Valérie began, that talent doesn't need certificates to be real. It just needs opportunities to shine. You are here because each of you has a unique gift. My job is not to teach you, but to help you recognize the power you already have within. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Miss Dubois, how do we know we're good enough? Valérie smiled, remembering when she herself had asked that question. Why are you here? Because you dared to try when the world told you that you couldn't. That determination, that courage, is more valuable than any university degree. Months turned into years. Valérie's program grew, expanding to 20 countries. Thousands of young talents found opportunities they otherwise never would have had. Some became translators, others cultural mediators, others human rights activists. But they all shared something in common, the belief that true talent transcends credentials and that every voice, no matter how silenced, deserves to be heard. At a special ceremony at the United Nations, Valérie received the International Human Rights Award. As she held the recognition, she thought of all the people who had made this moment possible. Her grandmother, who had sacrificed everything. Isabelle, who had believed in her when she was at her lowest point. Eleanor, who had fought for her against all odds. David Lee, who had found the courage to tell the truth. In her acceptance speech, Valérie did not speak about her achievements. She spoke about her grandmother. Lucie Dubois never had a university degree, never received official recognition for her work, but she understood something that the world is only just beginning to learn, that the value of a person is not measured in certificates, but in character, not in credentials, but in courage. Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. This award is not mine, it is hers. It is for every person who was ever underestimated, ignored, silenced. It is a reminder that extraordinary talent can come from ordinary places, and that sometimes the most powerful people are those the world never noticed. The ovation that followed lasted a full 5 minutes. People from all over the world, connected virtually, applauded not only Valérie, but all the Lucies of the world. All the grandmothers, mothers, invisible workers who had planted seeds of hope without knowing if they would ever flourish. That night, Valérie was in her apartment in Geneva, looking at the illuminated city. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Miss Dubois, I'm Maria. I'm 16 years old, and I live in a small town in Guatemala. I saw your documentary. I speak 5 languages that I learned from tourists visiting my town. Everyone tells me it's impossible for it to be true without formal education. But you gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I too can have a future. Can I apply to your program? Valérie smiled with tears in her eyes. Of course you can, Maria. Tell me your story. And as she listened to Maria's story, Valérie understood that this was her grandmother's true legacy. Not the dismantled networks or the awards received, but every individual life that was touched, every talent that was recognized, every voice that was finally heard. The cycle continued. Hope multiplied. And somewhere, Valérie was sure, her grandmother Lucie was smiling. Because in the end, this was never a story about languages or injustice or trials. It was a story about love. Love of a grandmother who prepared her granddaughter to change the world. Love that transcended death, time, and circumstance. And that love, translated into 11 languages and 1,000 acts of courage, had illuminated the world.